Hello, welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we are reviewing Dream Scenario. Written and directed by Kristoffer Borgli, Dream Scenario follows Paul Matthews, a mild-mannered biology professor who starts appearing in the dreams of people around him without explanation. The film stars Nicolas Cage, Julianne Nicholson, and Michael Cera. So Jeffrey, what do you think about Dream Scenario?
Overall, I would say Dream Scenario is certainly a very unique experience. It owes a lot to, I think, the first half of Charlie Kaufman's career, particularly the era like around being John Malkovich. And people who imitate Charlie Kaufman, I don't think always have his sharpness, his existential panic, this unique ability as a screenwriter that he has to follow an idea all the way down the rabbit hole. I always say this about Charlie Kaufman: lesser writers would just take the idea and a great idea and just write it through the whole screenplay, whereas he starts out with a great idea and he follows it to like its most illogical extensions, again, all the way down the rabbit hole. Dream Scenario, I'd say, mostly has those things. It uses this plot as kind of a springboard to satirize social media, to satirize influencer culture, academics, cancel culture, a whole host of other things that the film touches on. But ultimately, I think I was most interested in it as a character piece. Paul is a perfect stand-in for a middle-aged white man who feels very inadequate about himself. True. Even though the film is quite funny and views him as kind of pathetic, you have to identify with in some way because the world is changing all around him and sort of forgot about him. He has that quality of somebody who just needs somebody to listen to him, you know, for the love of God kind of thing. But anyway, I thought Dream Scenario was pretty successful.
Yeah, I really agree with what you said. I love the framing of the rabbit hole because he does go down this rabbit hole of so many weird possibilities, but also just gravitating to so many different subject matters. This movie had so many things to say, and I could tack onto that list the corruption of fame, the obsessive of fandoms, mental health, personal insecurity with how people perceive you. Yeah, there's just there's just so many things going on in this film. And I think with that said, I completely agree. I really enjoyed the film. I think the visuals and the scenes, some of them are so seemingly odd and weird and strange, but they all have, which also is no surprise for an A24 movie, by the way, they're filled with so much of a deeper meaning and a bit of nuance under that as well. Beau is Afraid came out early this year, and I think
I thought about Beau is Afraid too.
Yeah, Beau is Afraid attempted, I think, to do a lot of the same things. A lot of these weird scenes where there was supposed to be so much meaning in it, but I feel like that film unintentionally fell flat in those regards.
Double the length and quarter as funny.
It just got so lost in the weight of all these things it was trying to do. Yeah. Where I think this movie, for the most part, I agree with you, succeeded in that. Going back to what you were saying about Paul and his character, I do agree with you. It comes from a place of real insecurity and real fear and real panic about his place in the world. The film has some great scenes that explain that to us. One is that he's a teacher, so he's in class teaching and nobody's paying attention to him in class. Nobody's engaging with him or having something to contribute to the discussion, and there really is nothing for him. So he has that, and then he has this old college friend who has these posh dinner parties and only invites him over when he finds out he's been famous for appearing in all these people's dreams, including his own wife.
Yeah.
So the problem for Paul here, though, is that it's being manifested in all these negative reactions by him himself.
There's a lot that you talked about in there that I want to go on to. But in addition to that friend that has the posh dinner parties, he has another colleague who has a successful book out and is being known for research that he helped with. And he, of course, has concocted in his mind that she stole this information from him in this research. And she has this really pivotal line to him in the beginning of the film where she says theory and research is one thing, but actually doing it is a separate thing. And that seems to be something that Paul expects out of the world, that he should be able to have this prestige and all of this respect without ever actually doing the thing that gets you those things. Paul's a man who feels so forgotten about and so insignificant on the whole. He meets somebody that he used to date outside of the playhouse after they see a play, and she says this thing that stuck with me through the rest of the film. She says, "Oh, you're still doing that thing where you search for the insult." And he is. He's coming to a conversation waiting to feel inadequate. When these dreams start to happen, he bends his beliefs to accommodate the good dreams. So he starts entertaining vague ideas of, metaphysical ideas like religion or a social unconscious, all of these things. And he is so easily dismissing the bad dreams later in the film because they're less favorable towards him and make him into a sort of a villain. Ultimately, you just see that his main goal is his own self-worth and strengthening that at whatever means necessary.
Yeah, and that really starts at the beginning of the movie when the dreams start appearing in everybody's minds and everybody starts telling him their stories of the dream. And in them, he is really just being this passive person who's just standing there watching them as something bad happens to them. And And so the immediate thing he can think of from this is, why did I just stand there? Why do you see me that way?
Yeah.
As if they're reflecting on him by their own dreams. As the movie progresses, we see as his mental health deteriorates, so do the dreams of the people around him with him in them. And he starts doing some crazy shit in these dreams.
Going back to his sort of academic background, he thinks he deserves this prestige that he just doesn't have currently. And he wants to hijack his fame, take that fame to write a book on evolutionary biology because he wants to try to manufacture the way he's going to be remembered. I think that legacy has a lot to do with what this film is going after. And certainly middle-aged white males start to think a lot about legacy. And sometimes that produces great art and sometimes not so great art. But there's some really interesting examples of this. For instance, he's too good for a Sprite deal initially, but some of his other avenues don't seem like so fruitful. Suddenly he wants the Sprite deal. That leads to some pretty funny stuff. This prestige idea too, I love this scene a little later in the film that he just can't help but boast that he has a PhD to his daughter's teacher who only has a master's. There's just a lot of things in this film where you could tell that he's just so helplessly trying to feel anything at all.
Yeah, and I think some of that comes down to the corruption of fame and what it could have on people. I always like to say this nowadays, I don't buy lottery tickets anymore for this specific reason. I feel like at this point in my life, I do not want any of that. I don't want to be rich. I don't want to be famous. I just want to enjoy our little YouTube video review channel. Good things don't tend to come from that very often. A lot of bad things tend to happen because people aren't prepared for that level of fame and what it will do to you. And that's exactly what we see happen to Paul here, as well as his family. And I think this sheds some illuminating things on other subject areas. Specifically, there's this very odd sex scene that happens because one of the people at that company that is trying to PR rep him has a dream with him, and it's a very sexual dream, and she tries to recreate it with him one night while he's there.
It goes the way of American Pie.
Yes. That's a great way to put it. That scene has something really to show us about the obsessive sexualized nature of fandom. Just like the corporate board meeting, this is where Michael Cera comes into play for his big role in the film. And he is this guy that's really just looking to make a buck off of him. He's the it thing right now. He's popular. How can we make money off of him? The problem with Paul here is that he's so willing to engage with these types of people, which ultimately comments on his own sacrifice of morality to be somebody. And I think that becomes the main crux of the film.
I actually think that the middle portion of the film is the least successful, in my opinion. The boardroom with Michael Cera. I felt that the critiques in that could have been a little bit sharper, a little bit more biting. I kept waiting for the film to like go there, so to speak, and then it finally does go there in the last half hour. For some of the issues that maybe I had for like some broad social critiques in those scenes, I never took my eyes off Paul the character. I felt like Paul the character was always endlessly fascinating. It was just some of the social satire didn't totally land with me in that middle portion, but that certainly turns around in the last act, which is quite a bit sadder, quite a bit more bitter, and very interesting.
On that note, let's get to Nicolas Cage, because this is perhaps one of the best performances I think I've ever seen him in.
It's funny, for somebody who's been in so many bad films, he has like a strong amount of good performances. I can think of Leaving Las Vegas. I can think of Wild at Heart. I can think of Adaptation. I can think of Pig. And
Pig was great.
Yeah, he really has a lot of films that he's quite good in.
But in this particular film, I think he has such a range of acting here, from moments where he clearly feels small and insignificant to moments where he's just awkward and dorky. He really embodied a professor that was so dull and so uninteresting and so lacking of any passion whatsoever that he would be forgettable to anybody. Nobody would want to pay attention to him. And so I think he just nailed that on the head.
And that's why he's always talking about zebras. He's always talking about blending in with the herd, because he really blends in with this herd of academics that he's surrounded himself with. I think if the film has any flaws, and it's not necessarily that any of the actors around him aren't good, but more so, the film is so focused on these social satires and Nicolas Cage's character of Paul himself that these other characters kind of just feel like window dressing for what the film is trying to do elsewhere. Even though his daughters actually get some very funny lines, and his wife really don't get too much development. They're really there just to enhance Paul the character and make him more pathetic and sad.
I completely agree. And I think specifically when it comes to Julianne Nicholson's character, while she did a wonderful job, I don't think she was given enough in this movie to really build the stakes of their their marriage. I think if there was a bit more of an emotional arc between the two of them, I think the end could have landed a little bit deeper than it actually did. I still love the end.
Yeah, I like the end too, and I certainly felt something at the end, but I agree with you that it could have been shattering, and it wasn't. I think people can always forget that editing can be funny. We so always rely on our actors to be funny that people forget that cuts can be funny, and this film has my favorite cut probably of the year so far, and it's so funny. It's when Nicolas Cage's character agrees to be in the Sprite commercial and they cut him off halfway through.
He doesn't even finish the sentence.
It's an absolutely brilliant cut. It is so funny. There's a scene in the bar that's suddenly very quickly cut and it almost feels like a dream sequence. And then towards the end, there's a pivotal scene between him and his wife when he's saying goodbye to her outside their house. It's almost cut in a way that he's having his dream expectations versus his reality. Like her face keeps changing according to what he wishes her face looked like, and then you would see what her face actually looked like. It's really brilliantly edited, I think, in many spots.
What I do like about that scene is that it is really showcasing maybe the wish fulfillment, but what is really required is our action, but we don't have the ability to act in that moment for whatever reason, and he really fails in that moment, so he's expecting her to do all the work. But I really like that moment for showcasing that.
Yeah, the end of the film really has this kind of tricky tone because it becomes quite a bit more mournful. The film always has this kind of sad sack sensibility about it, but it plays it for humor for most of the film, and then it becomes both humorous and sad towards the end. But the film really walks that line quite expertly towards the end, which I really appreciated. I think I talked about the theme of legacy before. I think that ties to Paul's character. It's actually a good portion of the writing here that I really like is both the thematic material and Paul's character himself are one and the same. I appreciated how everything wasn't like separate and compartmentalized. It all fit together very nicely. But I think one of the main themes, and although it's two separate things, it's kind of the same thing, is a middle-aged white man persecution complex paired with cancel culture. The film takes like this very dark turn that we keep talking about in the last act where the satire turns to cancel culture and Paul starts to embody somebody who has been canceled. There's some examples of this that I think are taken right from the headlines. Like he makes a very weepy, insincere apology video that's very funny that everybody sees through. He's asked to leave a restaurant because people are uncomfortable and he says, why do I have to leave? Like I didn't do anything wrong. They should leave. That whole thing. What's interesting about the film is Paul ultimately didn't really do anything wrong. He's being canceled because he's in other people's dreams murdering them, but that has nothing to do with Paul himself. But the way that Paul is reacting to all of this is so self-righteous and so pitiable. We see him as the jerk that he is. So I think the film is really engaging with this in an interesting way and saying Paul is a self-righteous jerk, but also he may be a bit of a victim of false cancel culture at the same time. The film has a very complicated view, I think, of cancel culture and is engaging with it with a lot of nuance, which I appreciate, while never losing its sense of humor. So those are a lot of hard things to keep in balance.
I do want to disagree slightly when you said in the end, ultimately, that it wasn't Paul's fault.
I don't think that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't really mean that. I meant more that in
the dreams itself,
this origin of the dreams, why he gets canceled in the first place, he doesn't do anything wrong.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
But the way he reacts to it digs his hole further.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's
cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah. There's an interesting bit of symbolism with fluorescent lights that I haven't really figured out. But there's a scene where he's trying to fall asleep in the basement and he can't find the light switch to turn off the fluorescent light and he can't fall asleep under it. And then later in the film, he's at a book signing and a fluorescent light falls and hits him in the head. And I think there's an interesting bit of symbolism there. And I found that really poetic and I'm just not totally sure why yet. We saw the movie 2 hours ago. So I want to reflect on that a little bit, but I just wanted to throw it out there. One thing I wanted to ask you. Oh, do you have something on the lights?
I was going to say karma. I think it's karma in a certain way. The universe telling him he's so in his head, he's created all these problems, and now what happens? He can't sleep. And what do you do when you go to sleep? You turn the lights out. And he can't even turn the lights off to sleep.
Well, there you go. You solved it, Matthew. Also, and in this way, this is how this film is relatable to Tar, which is a wonderful film.
Are you kidding me? No, that's a joke, right?
Do you know how... No, it's not a joke.
Oh, my God.
Do you know how early in South Park's thing, they would kill Kenny every episode?
Yeah,
every episode, we're going to talk about Tar.
Oh, my God. Oh, anyway, what do you have to say about Tar?
I don't have anything to say about Tar, aside from Tar is good and so is this movie. But anyway... What do you think is the ultimate message of this film? I'm going to come out and say that I think maybe a flaw of the film is that it's shooting all these spitballs from the back of the classroom. Like it has so many targets that I don't really leave with a united sense of this is what this movie was trying to tell me.
I think we should call this a spoiler alert because I'm going to have to talk about the ending.
Okay.
So spoiler alert, we're about to talk about the ending of the movie. So if you have not seen Dream Scenario yet, go see it and then come back. but we will start in 3, 2, 1 with the spoilers, so you are prepared.
And I hope you've seen the talking heads stop making sense. It'll make a lot more sense.
All right, so I think the ending of the movie, this is actually one of the things I like about the movie, because I think with all the things that this movie is trying to juggle, I think the ending was such a poignant personal moment of reflection that really takes all these things and puts it into something so simplistic. And for me, I feel the lesson was that you don't need fame, you don't need money, you don't need to rely on other people to find purpose in yourself. This whole ending when he is reaching for his wife's hands and he says, I wish this were real, it's a realization of what he had that he completely lost. Yep. And everything he ever needed was right there with her, but he gave it all up for these materialistic things.
I completely agree with you, and I think that's a very poetic way to end the film. Everything having to do with Paul's character in the film is virtually perfect. It's just I'm having trouble tying all of its social satire with that ending.
So for me, I found everything else as distractions. And that's why he was distracted by it all throughout the movie. And in that moment, he realized he didn't need the distractions anymore. That's the way I saw it.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I think that it could be just a sense of feeling in the film that I went from thing to thing saying like, oh, okay, it's critiquing this. Okay, now it's making fun of this. Where this is going to sound worse than I mean, but it like I got the feeling that it was like a bunch of SNL sketches tied together with an extraordinary character.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in that way, I'm not sure that the film's cohesion of thematic material is perfect, but there's a lot to like in there. Where it ended, I think, is the most perfect spot that this film could possibly end in.
So you ready to go grades?
I am. I'm going to give this film a B+. I thought it was really great. I thought it was very sharp, very smart, very funny. I think it has a couple of flaws that I mentioned. That middle portion drags a little bit for me. Again, I don't think that the critiques are quite as sharp as they could have been. I think they could have been a little deeper and a little more specific. It's very rare that I compare someone to Charlie Kaufman. It's also even more rare that I compare someone to Charlie Kaufman in a positive way, because typically they don't do it very well. I was very impressed by this film. I thought it was a lot of fun.
So we could call it, I think, Charlie Kaufman-esque.
Charlie Kaufman-esque.
Yeah, would that be
Kaufman-esque, like
Kaufman-esque?
Kafka-esque. Kafka-esque, Kaufman-esque.
But I agree with you. I give it a B+ as well.
Stop.
I'm not copying you.
I know. We just always grade the same.
We'll get there someday. Something will happen. But I do agree. I want to refer to what you said earlier, how the ending could have been earth-shattering. And I agree that while I really enjoyed the ending, I felt exactly the same way. Like there could have been something really, really hard-hitting there. And it just fell slightly flat for me, even though I loved it, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I want to give so much more credit for A24 to produce a film like this, as well as all the films they have been producing lately. I do love that they're approaching filmmaking with all this original content, story, and ideas.
I agree, except for those people at the New York Film Festival who cut me in line because they're like, we're from A24.
They did that?
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's it for a review of Dream Scenario, which is in theaters. Sponsor us, A24.
They really did that?
Yeah.
We can't leave that in there, can we? We bought your books.
Well, yeah, we bought your books.
And I have Marcel the Shout.
Yeah, we bought your books. You can cut us in line at the New York Film Festival. It's fine. Can't leave that in somehow.
What?
You got to leave that in somehow.
I can't leave that in.
Why?
How can I leave
funny.
that in?
It's funny. People think it's funny.
Okay. I'll leave it in.
All right.
Oh, I have to do the ending. All right, and that's it for our review of Dream Scenario. Dream Scenario is now in theaters, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about Dream Scenario? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.